Hey, hello everyone. Hope you're excited about this session. And for this session, we're going to covering some tips how you achieve success in your MCAT setting. Today's session is brought to you by Kaplan. Kaplan has been helping students achieve MCAT success for more than 80 years and offering courses that are personalized to you, offer thousands of realistic practice questions and practice tasks, and are led by expert Kaplan teachers. And for our speaker today, Petros Minasi is the Senior Director of Prehealth Program at Kaplan, and I'll just let you take over from there to give a self-introduction.
Sounds great. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. It's great to be here. It's great to have this conversation with all of you. So yes, my name is Petros. I've been with Kaplan now for it will almost be 25 years, or it will be 25 years in March, which seems like it's flown by quite quickly. I am an MCAT instructor. I've been teaching the MCAT for the better part of those years with Kaplan, so I'm excited to be here. Have worked, with our curriculum, currently, continue to work on ways to improve our courses and get students higher and higher scores on the MCAT. And so I'm really excited to share some of these insights with you here today. I know we have a pretty short format as far as time is concerned, so we're going to try to squeeze in as much as we can and leave some time at the end for some questions from you. So if you've got questions, by all means, start thinking about them. Feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure Michael will share with me anything that that we want to answer for the group at large. So that's what we have. That's what we have to cover, and we're going to start. I'm going to start sharing my screen here again. So Michael, I think I need to take over you, right? So let's do that here. So hopefully everybody should see. Why is it paused? Probably because we were. Michael, can you see?
Yep, I can see it.
Presentation? Perfect. Great. Guessing we had it backstage. So as the title implies, we're going to talk about MCAT strategies. We'll talk about kind of what, what's on your minds in terms of this exam. But I always want to kind of set the context for students and, for you in your position as kind of as a pre-med, someone who's starting this process. The reason why you're here at this conference, the reason why you're here at this session, the reason why you're going to be going to the sessions that you've been to and you will be going to, is because at the end of the day, you want to be here, right? This is a white coat ceremony. This is the ultimate goal, right? The goal of entering medical school, wearing the white coat, and getting started on your studies. But really, the ultimate goal is to become a practicing physician. And the reality is that there are lots of obstacles along the way. I mean, from your undergraduate classes, your pre-med classes that you've been taking, of course, the application itself. I know you just went to a personal statement workshop, right? How to craft and talk about yourself. And then, of course, there's the good old MCAT. And the MCAT is a very, very important factor in the admissions process. We actually survey admissions officers year after year. We ask them what's the biggest application deal breaker, and year after year, the number one response is a low MCAT score. And the reason for that actually stems from the fact of why the MCAT exists. It's an exam that is there not to weed students out. It is an exam that's there to gauge your potential for performance in medical school. So not whether or not you're going to make a great doctor, not whether or not you're a great person or a nice person or a mean person. It's there to see what your potential is going to look like as far as undertaking medical school curriculum, which is quite intense, right? You think about it, in about 2 years' time, you're learning, the amount of material that you're learning in that period of time is exponential relative to what you've even learned as an undergrad and throughout your life, if you will. So it's a very, very high demand period of time. And so the MCAT exists to seek out what that potential is. Now, that being said, it's not to say that there's any type of minimum MCAT score. That's not true. There's nothing that says that if you get a perfect score on the MCAT, you're guaranteed to get admission. It's not the only factor that goes into the decisions the medical schools are ultimately making at the end of the day, but it is the most important one namely also because of the fact that it is the only thing that is standardized across all applicants, right? So when you think about a medical school getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 applications, they're getting applications from students from all over the country, sometimes internationally, right? So everybody has a different undergraduate curriculum. Everybody has kind of, it's hard to compare GPAs across the board, but it's very, very simple and very, very precise to be able to compare MCAT scores. And so for that reason, med schools place a lot of weight on this. And what that, of course, means for you is this is an exam that you're going to need to take very, very seriously. And I'm not just saying that because, that's what we do. I mean, this is just the reality. Again, I've been in this world for almost a quarter of a century. So I can say that with some level of confidence. I hope you appreciate that level of confidence when I say that, like, trust me on this. This is going to be an important exam for you. The big question that oftentimes comes up is, when should you be taking your MCAT? And I think this is one where, there's a lot of kind of misinformation that's out there that's important for you to make sure that you kind of time things correctly. You want to be taking the MCAT at the end of the day when you are primed and ready and prepared to take the MCAT. There is an assumption made by the AMC, the people that write the MCAT, that students are doing some type of preparation. This is not an exam that you just wake up in the morning and go and take. This is an exam that you will prepare for. I usually advise students to think of it like a 5-unit class, right? So it's like a science class with a lab attached to it as far as the amount of time that you're spending studying for this exam. But you want to take the exam when you're ready. And the last thing that you want to be doing is taking the real MCAT. So here's kind of like strategy tip number 1 for you. Don't go take the real MCAT as a practice. I hear that a lot from students. They say, well, I'm going to go take the actual MCAT just to see how it goes. Like, no. That score is going to be on your record. And medical schools do see the entirety of your MCAT scores. They see an MCAT transcript really at the end of the day. So the last thing you want to be doing is going and taking this thing just for, funsies, if you will. But really what you want to be doing is looking at the overall admissions timeline. So if you're not planning on taking a gap year, then think about this as far as like your junior year of undergrad. If you're planning on taking a gap year, then this becomes senior year. If you're doing 2 gap years, then it becomes, the year before you're planning on applying for medical school. So kind of everything moves, but the months stay pretty much the same. The ideal time to take the MCAT is really kind of 2 factors come into play. Factor number 1 is you want to make sure that you take the MCAT and have a score before the primary application season opens. And the primary application season opens at the end of May and at the beginning of June. That's when you can start to submit your applications. And the reason why you want your MCAT score to be done by then is because then your primary application will be considered complete. And if it's considered complete, then schools will start to actually evaluate the application. Now, that being said, you can apply to med school without yet having taken the MCAT. You will indicate when your MCAT test date is, but the schools are not going to be able to evaluate your application because they need that MCAT score for that initial screen of the application. So ideally, we want to be taking it sometime in April or May prior to that June submission, which means you are preparing for the MCAT starting about 5 to 6 months before that, which means you're preparing for the MCAT starting at, minimum in kind of September, October, if you will, of the year before. So, if you want to take the MCAT in April of 2024, no later than October of 2024 is when I would say you want to be actually starting to study for this exam. That being said, you can take the MCAT early. If you've finished your pre-med requirements and, you've got, this summer, we're kind of almost done with the summer, but let's say you finished your pre-med requirements, you wanted to study over the summer, take the test in, August or September, that's fine. Your score would then be ready for you come June. Or maybe you want to study this fall, take the test in January. There's also a January test date. There's no test date in February. The March test date is later in the month of March. So all these factors considered, you want to make sure that you time things out, right? So timing things out is going to be a pretty important kind of part of the preparation, as it were. The weird thing about the MCAT and med school admissions is that there are topics that are tested on the MCAT that you are actually not technically required to have pre-medical coursework in. So, there's biochemistry on the MCAT. It's actually a significant portion of the MCAT, but schools don't necessarily require you to have taken biochemistry. That being said, I would say you probably want to take a biochemistry class. With psych and soc, the behavioral sciences, again, it's not a prerequisite for most med schools, but it is on the MCAT. So is there material that you can learn on your own? Absolutely, because it's not, it's a very defined, topics that are tested on the MCAT that you want to familiarize yourself with. And the way that we build our courses, the way we build our books, of course, is we only cover stuff that's going to actually be on the MCAT. There's this misconception out there, and I hear this all the time. I literally just heard this about a month ago when I was at the AMC conference, where students say, well, I got to take anatomy because I want to go become a doctor, so I got to take anatomy as an undergrad. And the reality is that if you're interested in anatomy, sure, you should take it because it's going to build your scientific critical reasoning skills, right? There's nothing bad about that. But the reality is you're going to go take anatomy when you're in med school. They're going to, no med school is going to let you kind of opt out of anatomy because they're going to teach you anatomy in a very, very different way. They're going to teach it to you the way that they want it to be taught to you. So the reason why we bring this up is, as you're doing your undergraduate coursework, there's actually material that you're already reviewing and already learning that you will be accountable for on the MCAT when the time comes. And so, so often what happens, and I'm sure some of you maybe raise your hands or tell me if you agree with me on this, when you're saying something like organic chemistry, you're just trying to get through organic chemistry, right? You're not worrying about the MCAT. That's super far off in the future. But the reality is that material, those reactions, those are going to show back up again when the MCAT rolls around. So I alluded to this already as far as kind of how this all works, how this fits into the picture, but just to kind of put it into an actual, frame it up for you. When med schools are evaluating your application, they will look at your MCAT scores and your GPAs as your quantitative factors, and they will rank your application strength from the level of absolutely deny to presumably admit. Notice there is no such thing as an absolute admit. I mean, you can have a 4.0, a perfect MCAT score, and there's no guarantee for admission because the final decision the medical schools are going to be making is going to be a holistic decision. I mean, imagine in a pool of applicants, they're going to have plenty of people with strong GPAs, plenty of people with strong MCAT scores, right? The people who are applying to med school are the ones that have achieved the numbers that medical schools are looking for. So now they're going to be looking at other factors when making their final decisions as far as why to admit an applicant as it were. Which leads us to the big question of where do you even start to study? And the reality is that there are a lot of topics on the MCAT. So here are my top tips to you. This is how we've built our courses, but this is something that you need to just take into account and need to incorporate into your preparation, as it were. Big misconception out there is I'm going to study all of the physics, and I'm going to study all of the GChem, and then all of the OChem, and then all of the bio, and then all of the psych, and I'm going to do it kind of in these chunks. And the reality is you got to mix it up, right? And this goes back to this concept, this learning science concept of interleaving, of being able to kind of go back to material and go back to that material in a kind of precise series of progressions. And so these are just some topics that we've thrown up here for you to show you kind of how we think about your preparation, how we think about and how you should be thinking about making sure that you're kind of getting the right order of things. And that correct order of things is to actually mix things up. So you do a little physics, then you go into a little bit of biochemistry, and then you go into a little behavioral sciences, a little more physics, a little bit more biology, a little more behavioral sciences, right? So you're kind of always playing this dance of moving through different material so that way the material stays fresh in your mind. That way you're covering all the material and nothing is too far long ago as far as your actual practice was concerned and your actual learning of this material was concerned. So the way that we want you to think about this is really in this idea of these red, blue, and yellow lines. So the first time you go through anything, and this is true for the MCAT, this is true for kind of life in general. The first time you go through anything, you're going to learn it really, really well, right? You're going to learn it that first time, it's going to be like super great. You're going to retain a lot of information. But as time progresses, you forget things, right? If you don't use things, you don't remember them. And then they become, redundant as far as your memory, as far as your abilities to actually capitalize on them. So the way you want to think about this, the way that we have designed our courses, is this idea that during the first pass, you're doing a lot of content review. So content refreshers, content review, very, very important part of preparing for the MCAT. But the MCAT doesn't reward you for knowing content. It rewards you for being able to apply the content. So kind of as you're starting to see this drop off over time, as far as the information that's recalled, kind of like a vaccine booster. And I know that, that's something that's obviously been on our minds last couple of years. You give yourself a little bit of a boost and you start to work on assignments that are application-based. And what that will do is actually help you retain even more of the information. And then kind of as things start to drop off, you go to this third boost, third pass, which is the prep cycle, where you actually start to use the material and actually practice the material in as realistic of a setting as you can, as far as what it's going to look like for the MCAT. So all the while, what you're doing is you're kind of progressively building your mastery and progressively kind of getting better at taking the test and utilizing that material as it were. So that's another kind of top tip, kind of mindset moment for you as far as how to be thinking about this exam. And also, and this is, I think, the biggest kind of problem that pre-meds have is we want to learn everything, right? We want to go through, all the material. But the reality is the MCAT only tests you on very specific information. So, the saying usually, the way we think about it is that the MCAT is a mile wide and an inch deep, whereas your undergraduate courses are like 10 miles wide and 5 miles deep, right? So there's a much more kind of, much more in-depthness, if you will. I mean, when you're taking physics, it's being taught by a physics professor who wants you to learn the physics, right? They don't particularly care about the MCAT. They want you to really become a physicist. And so you have to kind of put yourself in that right mindset, as it were, as you're working through this. So, one of the ways that you can think about this is we're all good at different things, right? I mean, I personally, here's my story, like I didn't care for physics. Physics wasn't something that I saw any relevance to as far as what I was majoring in. So that was something that I had to work more on when I was studying for the MCAT, right? So it's an important kind of mindset for you to be thinking, okay, if I'm good at something, I need to force myself to work at the things that I'm not so great at. So, we incorporate these content placement quizzes. If you ace the quiz, you basically skip the unit. We say, okay, let's move on to something else. Because what you have to remind yourself of is the way you improve your MCAT score is not by doing things that you're good at. The way you improve your MCAT score is by forcing yourself to work on things that you're not great at yet. So that's an important kind of differentiating kind of way of thinking about this. We like to do things, and I say this to myself all the time, like we like to do things that we're good at, right? Because when we do things that we're good at, who would agree with me? You can put this in the chat. If we do things that we're good at, we feel good about ourselves, right? That's the reality of it, is that we were like, oh, I'm awesome at this, and so I'm going to keep doing that. That's why we, play the games that we play, or play the sports that we play, or major in the things that we major in, because we're good at those things, and that's fine. But for the MCAT, to improve your score, you need to be forcing yourself to always be looking at things from the perspective of, kind of the bigger picture of what the overall score is going to look like. I've alluded to this a couple of times already as far as the content and as far as the integration of the content. The MCAT's an awesome exam in that it actually integrates the sciences. And this is where a lot of students get thrown off early on when they're studying for this exam. So I want you to kind of take a pause and think about this. When you take general chemistry, you are only studying general chemistry. You do physics, you do bio, you're only studying those topics. The MCAT comes in and actually mixes it all up. It incorporates chemistry and physics in the context of the biological system for the chemical and physical foundations of the biological system section of the exam. Same thing goes for the behavioral sciences. Same thing goes for even the biological sciences. Everything is all integrated with each other. And an example of this is, and this is a very simple example, you could have a passage that is entirely about the circulatory system. And when we think circulatory system, we think biology, because that's where we learned about the circulatory system. But then all of a sudden, all of the questions that are being asked are physics-related questions, that are fluid-related questions, right? They're asking you about cross-sectional area and pressures and velocities. And you're thinking to yourself, what does this have to do with biology? Well, the reality is, it has everything to do with biology. So the MCAT is an integrated exam as far as the content areas are concerned. So much so that, there are lots of colors on this screen, right? So in the chemical and physical foundation section, you're being tested on biochemistry, on general chemistry, on organic chemistry, and on physics, right? You have all these topics. And really this is very relevant to the career that you're about to have, because the human body is completely integrated, right? The digestive system doesn't operate on its own, right? It's operating to be able to extract fuel that your body can then utilize in a way to help your brain function, right? So you have to think about kind of how this relates to what the future is going to look like for you at the end of the day. The MCAT as an exam tests you explicitly on content, but it also explicitly tests you on some very specific skills. These are the ones that are in white here on the screen. So any question is going to be the intersection of one of these skills in white along with content. And that could be multiple content, there could be multiple skills that are being tested simultaneously in one question. We've added the pink circle, the MCAT test expertise, just because the better you know how the test is structured, the better you know what the common pitfalls are going to look like, the better off you're going to be, and the better prepared you're going to be, quite frankly, for this exam. And so, this exam is different in the sense that it is primarily a passage-based exam, meaning you get these passages. The passages are giving you new information that you've never seen before. You have to extract information from the passage, as well as extract information from your own content knowledge, marry the two together in order to be able to reason out an answer choice. This is the same skill that physicians are utilizing on a daily basis, right? They've got their knowledge from their years of experience through med school, through residency, through practice. You go into the office and say, here are the symptoms that I am presenting. The physician then has to be able to say, okay, based on what I'm seeing in you, based on what I know, here's my diagnosis and here's the course forward for you. Same thing goes for the MCAT. It's, here's the information, here's the course forward that we're going to be looking at. The other thing about the MCAT is that it is a different exam in that it will never reward you for just knowing information. It's always going to reward you for being able to apply the information. So what I wanted to do here was kind of walk you through a very typical MCAT question. This is a discrete question. There are a number of MCAT questions that are not tied to a passage. This is an example of one of those. But let me kind of walk you through and don't try to jump to the right answer just yet. Oops, even though my PowerPoint just did for us. But let me kind of walk you through what we mean by this. So the first sentence here says the sodium potassium pump is an ATPase that pumps 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell for each ATP that's hydrolyzed. Have they actually asked us a question at this point? Is there actually something that they are? And you can put your response in the chat here. Just give me a thumbs up, right? Have they actually asked us a question in the first sentence? Yes or no? No, right? I see a couple of you are already responding, right? This is not a question. This is information that has been given to us. You probably already know this information because it is the most commonly used example for active transport in introductory bio textbooks. But if you have forgotten it, at least they told that information to you. What that means, though, is they're not going to reward you for knowing this information. They're going to reward you for being able to use this information. Second sentence says, cells can use the pump to help maintain cell volume. Again, they haven't asked you a question. They've maybe given you some new information, but again, we have to go further. Third sentence says, which of the following will most likely happen to the rate of ATP consumption immediately after a cell is moved to a hypotonic environment? Now we actually have a question. We have to define what hypotonic is. So, this is where your content knowledge would come into play. Hypotonic means low solute concentration. So if you've got a low solute concentration, you put the cell into a low solute concentration environment, there's a higher concentration of water on the outside. So the water is going to want to go in, the cell is going to want to swell up. Since you are blessed with having the sodium potassium pump, it's pumping 3 sodium out of the cell, 2 potassium into the cell. So there's a net movement of 1 ion out. It will keep pumping until you get to an isotonic state, meaning you've evened things out. So there's going to be an increase as far as the consumption of ATP is concerned, because it's going to be pumping more. Once you get to that isotonic state, then it can drop back down, right? It can say, okay, I've gone up, and now I can go back down. So your prediction may be that it's answer choice C, that it would increase and then it would decrease. However, and this is where the MCAT tries to trip you up, they didn't ask you what will eventually happen. They asked you what is going to immediately happen after the cell is moved to the hypotonic environment. And what immediately is going to happen is it would increase, right? So this is where you have to not only kind of bring in information from the outside as far as what hypotonic means, you have to incorporate the information about the sodium potassium pump's abilities, and you have to make sure that you're reading the question closely enough and actually answering the question that was being asked of you. The MCAT does this a lot. Sometimes they'll put answer choices in that are incorrect answer choices, but they are true statements, right? They'll say things like, they won't ever say this, but something to give you an example, like the sky is blue during the day. Yes, it is, but that's not actually answering the question that was being asked of you. So you have to always be on the lookout for what is actually being asked of you at the end of the day. The last thing that I'll say here, and we'll open up for Q&A, because I know we wanted to leave some time for that, and I see some questions have come in, so I'll be more than happy to answer this for you as we go. There's this misconception out there that, I'm going to do whatever my friends did. Maybe you have fallen into this trap, and that's fine. Unfortunately, forums like Reddit, Student Doctor Network, right? Those propagate these, right? Here, I got a 520, and here was my 100-day plan. And you think to yourself, well, I want a 520, so I'm going to go follow this person's 100-day plan. Here's the reality, and I say this to you as somebody who wants you to do well on this exam. Everybody is unique. Everybody has different strengths, different weaknesses. Everybody learns differently, right? Some people do better with books. Some people do better with tutors. Some people do better with classes. It just kind of depends on who you are as an individual. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that you need to do what other people are doing. You need to come up with a plan that works for you. I know I've spoken to this already about how our course is built, but one of the big facets that really, I think, separates out how you're going to be thinking about your exam is that we actually build a personalized plan based off of your strengths and weaknesses, right? You tell us what your schedule is going to look like. You tell us how much availability you have. We then go and say, okay, let's analyze your performance and make recommendations to you as far as what you should be doing as you go through your preparation, because again, everybody is going to be, is going to be kind of in a different place, as it were. Practice is going to be a big part of this. So whatever you do as far as your preparation is concerned, make sure that you're incorporating realistic practice as far as your time allotment is concerned, but also making sure that you're giving yourself time to review those practice tests, right? So we spend a lot of time building, perfecting what our practice exams look like. We actually incorporate all of the AMC materials in there as well. So, you'll have that kind of bit, as it were. And as I alluded to already, you do have the ability to kind of find the course that's right for you, because everybody is, and I couldn't stop myself from sharing Ari Kim. Ari is one of our rock star instructors. So chances are when you take a course with us, you'll encounter Ari at some point throughout your preparation. But the reality is that there are lots of different options available, and it's just about finding the option that's going to be ultimately right for you at the end of the day. So that's kind of the key, if you will, as we go through this. So I wanted to make sure that we got some time to go through the questions. So Rim asked a good question here. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, as far as how much should we expect your scores to increase from the diagnostics to the official test? Here's what I'll say. We've just recently did another version of the study. We know that the more work that students do, the more precise work that students do, and tailored work that students do, the higher their scores are going to go. So this is actually the results of that study, that students who put in the work with Kaplan raise their score by 15 points on average. That's from the diagnostics to the official test. But that's not to say that just by taking a Kaplan course, your score is going to go up 15 points. That is that you do the work, right? We know that our course works when you do the work. Our course doesn't work when you just sign up and get the books and put them in your bedroom and never look at them again, as it were. So that's the case there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can take over for the questions.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Yeah. So the next question is just so one person is wondering, what if you're finishing your pre-med requirements during your senior year? So you mentioned that pretty much by senior year is when you basically finish up all the courses, which makes it easier for your MCAT prep. He or she is wondering just what would the timeline look like then?
I mean, the timeline would look the same. It would just be pushed back, right? So if you're finishing your pre-med courses in your senior year, then you would want to be preparing for the MCAT after those pre-med courses are complete. You wouldn't want to be, you ideally don't want to be studying for the MCAT not having completed all of your pre-med courses. That said, there's some stuff in physics, some stuff at the tail end of physics, some stuff at the tail end of organic chemistry, depending on your school, that that is less tested on the MCAT. So maybe you can get away with it, but generally speaking, you would just be pushing everything back.
Right. Okay, there's another question that was if they already use the 7th edition of Kaplan books rather than the 9th edition, which is the newest, will there be a big difference in the content, or the changes are kind of minimal?
There was a big change between 7th and 8th edition. So yes, the 9th edition would be significantly different. But I mean, here's the reality. We update our books every year. There are small changes that happen to the MCAT. I generally say to students, if your books are more than 2 editions old, probably get a good idea to get a new set of books, because small changes over time add up to big changes. So that would be my recommendation to you. We actually have the new 10th edition has come out and is available now, and is the new one, the newest one, I should say. There weren't much of a difference between 9th and 10th edition changes though, so because the test didn't change all that much.
Right. Okay, there's another question that was asking can you self-study certain topics, or would you recommend that you haven't taken a course for example, biochem and physics for this person?
You can self-study for some of the topics. That just depends on how good of a learner you are as far as the self-studier is concerned. I wouldn't recommend self-studying biochem as a whole, because it's pretty intricate, especially when you get into some of the major processes. For physics too, probably some of the tail end stuff can be self-studied, but I would definitely say for electrostatics, that would be something that you'd want, be in a formalized course for to learn. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. There's a person that's wondering, like, does the Kaplan program set up kind of a customizable schedule for you, like in specific order, or does it like just like it gives you all the access?
Fully customized. So the way it works is that everybody gets everything that we have. So nobody doesn't get anything. So if you're taking a course with us, you get all the materials. However, we're not going to recommend that every student does every single bit of material in there because you have different strengths and weaknesses along the way, right? So that's what I kind of alluded to earlier. We will give you a diagnostic. We will be assessing you along the way, and we'll be making recommendations for you based on your strengths and weaknesses, really based on your areas of opportunity and relative to how high yield a topic may be. So I'll give you an example. I love using this example. She's out of med school. She's actually a practicing physician now, so I can tell the story. So I had a student, her name was Sarah. 2 days before the MCAT, it's a true story. 2 days before the MCAT, I get a freak out email, which was along the lines of, I've never learned alpha and beta decay. Can we meet for like 30 minutes or an hour to go over alpha and beta decay? My MCAT is in 2 days. And my response to her was, no, we will not meet about alpha and beta decay. Number one, because your MCAT is 2 days away. And even if we learned alpha beta decay, you're not going to have enough time to practice with it. But more importantly, the reason why we're not going to meet about alpha and beta decay is because chances are you're not going to get a question about alpha and beta decay. It's a very low yield topic. She had happened to have gotten a question about alpha and beta decay in one of her practice tests, had gotten it wrong, and had a freak out moment. She went and took the MCAT. Of course, I get an email from her like 3 days later saying, you were right. And that was the end of that. So moral of the story is, yeah, the program is fully personalized depending on what your needs are, but it's also personalized based on your schedule. So, we have students that come in who say, look, I'm only going to have, 12 weeks, and I'm only going to have 10 hours per week in order to be able to study for this MCAT. So we'll shrink it down for them accordingly. Ideally, you want, more time, but we do make adjustments accordingly. So, and then you have busier times of the year, less busy times of the year. I mean, summer sometimes is less busy, so you can be doing more work, and then you have busier time that comes up in the fall, so or in the the spring, and so you would do less work at that point. So we tailor it accordingly. That's what it is.
Okay. There's another attendee that was asking, like, what ratio would you recommend, like dividing time between doing content review versus like doing practice questions?
So I'm not going to answer that question because it's not a uniform answer across the board, right? It's not a one-to-one. Here's the deal. You're going to need to make sure that you have a significant amount of application practice and prep practice. The big mistake that students make is they spend too much time reviewing content. The reason I'm not going to kind of give a definitive ratio is back to what I was saying earlier. It depends on each student, right? So that's where the personalization comes into play. That's what we're able to gauge is, how much content you're going to need to review, how much you're going to, need to kind of hone up on as far as making sure you have a strong content foundation before diving into things. So
Great. Awesome. Okay. The next question is that, like, this might or might not be the last question, actually. So it's not necessarily about the MCAT, but more so about like prerequisites. Just like, do you have a sense of like whether med school committees accept AP courses or college courses taken during high school for the requirements?
Generally no, unless your school has allowed you to use that as a requirement to get out of something. So for instance, like there's a lot for English AP, right? So there's like a reading and composition type requirement at your undergraduate level, but you AP'd out of it, then schools will acknowledge that and say, okay, well, we're not going to force med school's not going to force a student to go take a class, quite frankly, pay a lot of money for a class, if just for the sake of fulfilling it. Generally speaking, for the sciences though, they will then want to see an advanced course. So if you like AP'd out of a bio requirement, then take a upper division cell bio class kind of thing, is what it is.
Right. Yeah, that's unfortunately we are running out of time officially for this session. But yeah, thank you so much for the amazing presentation and the insightful Q&A session,
Yep.
Petra. And I'm sure we learned a lot from your session.
Good. Yeah. And our team will be at the exposition. So feel free to connect with all of them. And it was a pleasure speaking with all of you. If you do want to kind of set up time to speak with someone, you can use this QR code as well, and we can set you up with one of our enrollment advisors and figure out which one is right for you. But yeah, if you got questions, by all means, we're going to be around. So feel free to reach out, and good luck with everything. And thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. And for everyone, I'll see you at our next session for today. See you.